Триває 100.
The Ukraine continues its resistance. My name is Vasil Samakhala. We are beginning our day with a discussion of the humanitarian situation in Ukraine and its crucial deterioration. We have a very substantial representation from the different international organizations that will brief us on the situation. The first to take the floor is Saviano Abreu, representing UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs.
We have reached 5 months of war in Ukraine, and although the world's attention seems to be moving elsewhere, the situation here in the country is far from any change. The truth is that Russia's war in Ukraine continues to cause immense human suffering. People here are waking up every day to see their family members or loved ones to be killed, injured, their houses, hospitals, and schools destroyed, and having to make hard choices to either leave their places or find ways to survive in areas under constant bombardment. Over the last 5 months, the UN and humanitarian organizations working with us here all across Ukraine have made every effort to increase the scale and the scope of our work. We're trying to provide assistance to every single person who needs it here in Ukraine. Today, over 11 million people in Ukraine have received some sort of humanitarian assistance. My colleagues here from the other UN agencies can give you some details. However, we do know that is not enough. People are today living in non-government controlled areas of Ukraine, including areas that have recently shifted control. They are not receiving the support they need. Since the start of the war, the UN and our colleagues from the NGOs have not been able to send any relief supplies to areas beyond the control of the government of Ukraine. We have not been able to conduct any assessments on the impact of the war on humanitarian needs. In Zaporizhzhia Oblast, for example, we have a very recent example of the challenge that we are facing here in Ukraine. This week, the Russian Federation prevented us from crossing the front line to deliver assistance in Polohi. We were prepared, we had the supplies, and we could not go. We have to deliver the 50 tons of different humanitarian supplies to another area, a settlement in the government-controlled areas called Stepanivsky. While there, our team had to take shelter as shelling starting the settlement. The shelling happened dangerous close to us, while our colleagues were trying to offload the trucks. Both sides to the conflict, they were notified of our movements, and they knew that humanitarians were there at that moment. This is only one example. Since February, we have been prevented on many occasions from going to Mariupol, to Kherson, to Donetsk, to Volnovakha, despite trying and notifying the parts of the conflict of our movements. We could not enter Severodonetsk or Lysychansk since the control of the city shifted. All in all, access for humanitarian to non-government controlled areas of Ukraine is extremely difficult, to not say impossible. Yet, we all know that people in these regions, in the Donbass, in the southern Ukraine, they are in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. They pass through the conflict, they must uphold their obligations on the international humanitarian law, enable free and safe passage for humanitarians to reach people in need, no matter where they are. We saw this week that when there is a will, things can change. With the support of Turkey, the UN, and both the government of Ukraine and the Russian Federation, we start a joint coordination center to facilitate the implementation of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And this has already been established and will facilitate a humanitarian maritime corridor to allow ships to export grain and other foodstuffs and fertilized from Ukraine. Now, we have to go one step further and make sure that no one is left behind, also here in Ukraine. We need the parts to urgently agree on humanitarian access to all regions of Ukraine so we can save lives and alleviate the suffering of people who endured these 5 months of war. It's an obligation, and the people of this country need it now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Я запрошую далі.
I would like to give the floor to Victoria Mykhalchuk, who represents the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. She will talk about the particular topic. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. The war is going on. The situation with the food situation is still having an impact on the least defended population. My colleagues will elaborate on that matter, and I will talk about the agricultural sector and its suffering. The lack of access to the critical infrastructure, including fuel, seeds, fertilizers, and plant protection products, will continue to have a negative consequence on agricultural production and will be reflected in food prices, driving them further upwards. With these problems, everyone is confronting livestock producers, for example, because they don't have enough resources with the veterinary products, supplies, and additives. Moreover, a 25% reduction of the livestock population was observed nationally among smallholders, mainly due to the distress slaughtering to reduce costs. Initial estimates from June indicate that the preliminary damage to the agricultural sector is between $4 to $6 billion US, including damage to infrastructure such as irrigation, storage, machinery, equipment, shipping infrastructure, greenhouses, field crops, etc. This season, according to the FAO estimates, with the harvest of winter crops starting in July, the harvest is expected to be up north of 51 million tons of cereal. Considering areas directly affected by war, only 60.9 million tons of total 75 million tons of storage capacity are physically inaccessible. In the accessible storage, out of them, 35% remain filled with 22 million tons of cereal and oilseeds awaiting to be exported. To wit, accessible is only 65% of the available storage. To address the storage crisis, our organization is closely working with the Ministry of Agricultural Policy and Food and has developed a grain storage support strategy requiring an additional US dollars in the amount of 65 million in an expansion of the RRP to deploy 4.07 million tons of storage capacity. These days, FAO will announce a tender for the purchase of the necessary equipment, sleeves for grain storage, loaders and unloaders, as well as modular storage units. Farmers from 20 regions of Ukraine will be able to get the necessary temporary equipment for grain storage, and the terms of participation in the project will be announced in the near future. In addition, our organization continues to support small farmers and has already provided assistance to more than 30,000 families, that is 80,000 people, including the financial assistance in the Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions. With more resources, FAO will be able to help the most vulnerable households by providing animal feed, chicken, winter and wheat seeds. We continue to work for the most vulnerable population to be ensured that they have stable access to food. Thank you. Thank you for your information about the agricultural sector. Thank you for your specifics and the numbers. These numbers don't make sense unless we settle the export facilities. And we will now give the floor to the representative of the United Nations Food Organization.
5 months into the war, WFP, the World Food Programme, remains very concerned by the deterioration of the humanitarian situation inside Ukraine. We estimate that about 1 in 3 Ukrainians are currently food insecure in the country, rising to 1 in 2 in some areas of the east and south. Our focus is on delivering assistance flexibly as a mix of bread deliveries, food rations, and cash payments to support the different needs of the most vulnerable people across the country, whether they are displaced, have remained in areas under intense fighting, or live in places where commercial supply chains have been heavily disrupted and where food is inaccessible. This month, we supported a total of 2.5 million people in the country with either food distributions or cash payments. We are prioritizing and scaling up cash assistance wherever it is possible, wherever there is access to banks and where markets are functioning. Since March, we have distributed a total of $200 million in cash. We are continuously working to get access to communities near the front line and in newly Russian-controlled areas. This month, we notably delivered assistance in Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, and Siversk in Donetsk Oblast, as well as in several areas of Kharkiv Oblast. We are also working to deliver assistance in frontline areas of Zaporizhzhia Oblast. But we continue to face numerous access challenges. We call for unimpeded and safe access to populations in need. The World Food Programme buys as much food inside Ukraine as possible. Our priority is to work with the government, with local authorities, with NGOs, and with the private sector to help markets recover, to restore access to food, to help stabilize institutional services and safety nets, and to help sustain economic activity, working with national suppliers in order to reduce vulnerability and improve access to food in the long term. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Питання і відповіді у нас.
Answers and questions session will take place later on. Now, who is going to take the floor now? We would like to give the floor to the United Nations representative of the Office for Refugees.
Impact on people and the country is worsening. People are struggling to rebuild damaged homes, reunite with their families, recover from deep-set trauma of what they have experienced, and regain their jobs and incomes in an environment of economic crisis, rising prices, and fuel shortage. UNHCR continues to deliver assistance and services as close as possible to the places where people remain or have been displaced. The UNHCR response has now reached nearly 1.6 million people with protection services, cash assistance, and essential items to address immediate needs, and shelter support to repair damaged homes, and protect people from the elements and create safe and dignified accommodation in reception and collective centres. President Zelensky has said that the coming winter may be the worst since independence of Ukraine. And the people with whom we speak are already worried about how they will manage to stay safe and warm in their damaged homes and how they will recover the cost of utilities during the winter as prices continue to rise. To prepare for the freezing winter ahead, humanitarian actors have joined efforts with a common plan, with critical activities to support the most vulnerable over winter. Many people will be much more vulnerable to extreme winter conditions compared to previous years. Collectively, millions of people are living in severely damaged homes or displaced to collective centres, including schools and dormitories that need to be used to resume education activities in the autumn. Reduced supply of gas and fuel due to attacks on energy resources and rising prices due to inflation and massive job losses mean the ability of people to meet their own needs throughout winter is far more difficult. And we all know that winter in Ukraine can be harsh, with freezing temperatures and strong winds. Helping the millions of people displaced or living in damaged homes to have access to warm, safe and dignified living conditions during winter will require a massive whole-of-society response and the collective effort of everyone. Government institutions, local partners, financial institutions, the private sector, international donors, and humanitarian actors. As a humanitarian actor, UNHCR is committed to contributing to this collective effort and will prioritise an additional 120 million over the several hundred million already provided in the war response so far. This will consist of three main activities: refurbishment of collective centres where people displaced can live in warm, safe and dignified conditions. Light and medium repairs, including improved insulation to thousands of war-damaged homes belonging to the most socio-economically vulnerable families. And additional cash assistance and winter items, including thermal blankets, heaters, and solid fuel. Overall, we aim to assist an additional 550,000 people through our contribution to the humanitarian winterisation response. UNHCR, as lead of the shelter and NFI cluster, played a central role in the preparation of the winter priority procurement and repair plan. This plan details out $226 million multi-sector response aimed at providing critical interventions at household level to protect the most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. І після цієї розмови про тяжку зиму, яка на нас чекає, я запрошую.
Now I would love to give the floor to Alyona Zubchenko. She represents the United Nations Population Fund. She will talk about the population problems. UNFAP works to end preventable material deaths to ensure that the gender-based violence is ended. Since 24th of February, our organization has scaled up our activities in Ukraine. We have provided 73 metric tons of interagency reproductive health kits, supplies and medicines to 33 national healthcare facilities, mainly maternity and perinatal hospitals. UNFPA is working to establish a supply chain to cover the needs of pregnant women and survivors of sexual violence in all regions of Ukraine. In the context of the organization to establish 32 mobile health teams across Ukraine, we have already set up 3 mobile health teams in Kyiv, Vinnytsia, and Lviv regions. These teams are linked to existing health facilities and travel to rural areas where services are hard to access, providing quality and timely reproductive health services and counseling. Before the war in Ukraine, UNFPA supported a network of many facilities in Ukraine to help survivors of gender-based violences. These include 2 national hotlines and 65 facilities made up of service of delivery points, shelter, crisis rooms, and so on. We continue to coordinate our work with the 30 facilities still running in Ukraine, and they are supported by the local authorities, including 2 hotlines for survivors of gender-based violence. 32 psychosocial mobile teams provide psychological consultations and referrals to social services to survivors of gender-based violence in 15 oblasts across the country. Our teams visit survivors in their homes and other locations depending on their needs. This week, additional 67 psychosocial mobile teams will be up and running in Ukraine. So altogether, we provide help to 100 such teams. As for the conflict-related areas of our work, together with the Office for the Euro-Atlantic Integration of Ukraine, we opened in Zaporizhia a center to help survivors, and we are planning to open 3 more centers in Lviv, Dnipro, and Kyiv. During the first month, specialists at the center provided 36 psychological consultations, many consultations of general nature, and received 80 cases and requests for information. Aurora, a program online platform that we are running, is providing support from the psychotherapists, and we have helped 62 persons, the victims of the gender-related violence, including 60 survivors of sexual violence. Our hotline has been contacted by more than 13,000 times, including 2 calls about cases of rape and 66 calls about cases of sexual violence. We are bi-weekly publishing snapshots reflecting the situation. The information is available on the website of the UNFPA. Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Varvara Zhluktenko, representing the International Organization for Migration. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, dear journalists. According to the data, the most recent representative overview that the International Organization for Migration has conducted in July, currently in Ukraine, more than 6 million persons are internally displaced. It constitutes 15% of the general population, and it seems to have grown a little bit as compared to the June data, when we counted 6.3 million internally displaced persons. People are leaving the southern, eastern, and northern parts of Ukraine. 5.5 internally displaced persons have come back home. Absolute majority of them were internally displaced. 16% of those have come back from abroad. The major regions where people return to includes Kyiv, the city of Kyiv, Kyiv region, Kharkiv Oblast, Odessa Oblast, and Chernihiv regions. The situation is quite critical, is one of the areas why people are trying to get back. International Organization for Migration state that 60% of the people who were employed before the war have lost their jobs. 9% of the internally displaced person didn't have any source of income since the war started. 35% informed us, and I highlight that we are talking about households, not particular people. So the income for those households is not more than 5,000 hryvnias per month, which is much lower than the minimum wage in Ukraine. Our research has also indicated that there is a need to get prepared for winter for the IDPs and those who have come back home, and for those who never left their place of residence when the war began. 44% of the people that we have surveyed, representing all social walks of life, said that they needed to renovate their homes, replace windows, increase insulation. 26% of IDPs are afraid that they will have to leave their place of residence because it is not fit to be lived in terms of warmth, ice, and other conditions. To help those who are suffering from the war to cope with these challenges and other problems, the International Organization for Migration is providing health to different communities and centers of shelters where people are living, including toiletries and other stuff. Also, we are dealing with the renovation of these centers. We are also setting up to help with the mobile health points to help the internally displaced persons and the local community who are in need. In addition, we respond to the immediate threats to the people, especially in those areas that have recently been those have been relieved from the Russian occupation. We are also setting up the hotline fighting the human trafficking, and we are helping those who are forced to leave Ukraine in terms of cross-border activities to provide all the necessary means to a safe migration. We have also a special account to provide psychological health to those who are in need of this kind of help. I would like to all the panelists to come up here at the podium and to answer the questions that will be asked from the floor.
Ukrinform, Віталій Голод. Перше питання до...
The first question to Ms. Zhluktenko and other panelists. What are specific needs of the refugees from Ukraine as compared to Syrian refugees or refugees from Africa? What is it that you might, what's your take on that?
I think one of the key issues to understand from the beginning is the people's needs and the people's movement. There are a lot of people that are moving back and moving away, and once people move back to Ukraine from their refugee status in the surrounding countries, it's also somewhat unclear as to whether they are returning home or whether they're going to secondary or tertiary places of displacement. So the main thing is data, to try to understand really the movement of people and what their key needs are. UNHCR has completed an intention survey conducted with a range of people in the surrounding countries to understand their specific needs. We know the basics. We know that those that are returning home do need repairs to their places if the prevention to return is damage. Many people can't return home because they're from areas that are occupied or areas that are completely destroyed, or both. So we need to provide assistance to them at their point of displacement, many of those being collective centres or staying with host families, friends, relatives, and so forth. So we ultimately use, including with all the humanitarian partners and other agencies, a mix of cash-based approaches and in-kind approaches, including minor, medium repairs and reconstruction, but also provision of cash so that people have the choice to purchase the things they need and make ends meet. Thank you.
Ще питання?
І ще питання.
And another question, and I turn to all the panelists. Russia is trying to wage an exhaustion war. How do you think your international bodies will sustain and are able to help Ukrainians?
War. So the United Nations humanitarians were used to this kind of environments. We know how to operate in this kind of environments. It's dangerous. There are many complexities, and we have to have agreements from the parties, from the Russian Federation, from the Ukrainian government, to make sure that we can do our work. Here, the situation is quite complex, specifically in non-government-controlled areas. In the other areas of the country, I think the operation is going much smoother than it was in the beginning of the war. We are able to access people, we are able to deliver assistance thanks as well to the support that we received from the international community. We received more than $2 billion in donations for our humanitarian assistance here. We are revising the numbers now. The humanitarian situation keeps deteriorating. More and more people need assistance and needs it for longer, so we need to revise it, and we're going to launch a new appeal very soon, probably next week. But as I said, in government-controlled areas, the situation is dire, but we can operate. The situation is much more complex in areas beyond the control of the government of Ukraine. So this is the area that we are engaging with both parties at the most high levels in Moscow, in Kiev, in New York, to make sure that we can operate. So far, as I mentioned before during my speech, there are areas that we cannot access, and there's this area that we know that people desperately need assistance, and we are trying and keeping using all the means that we have to make sure that we reach agreements and we can reach these areas. There are many mechanisms that we can use. There are humanitarian corridors, there are ceasefires, there are other means. So far we didn't succeed in none of them, but we keep trying.
Все? Угу. Я маю питання ще до Вікторії та Антона, скоріш за все.
I would like to turn to Victoria or Anton. The measures targeting the Ukrainian agricultural sector are targeted in the context that this sector will survive. The international organizations, do you have plan B? If we don't revive the agricultural sector of Ukraine, it will impact the food security throughout the world, won't it? Thank you for the question. Yes, we are aware. Before the war, Ukrainian export of grain was at the amount of 6.6 million tons per month. 320,000 tons it was in March. In May, in June, this number reached more than 2.1 million tons. We understand the crucial meaning of the exports, and we have been advocating the cause of opening Ukrainian ports. And globally, we see that there are some breakthroughs here. Locally, together with the relative ministry, we are working to open alternative avenues, and we will be implementing them. One of the alternative ways that we are immediately supporting is exporting the grain through the territory of Romania. And with the help of the Ismail laboratory, we want to have it certified and speed up the export procedure through these points. As for the plan B, if there is no export altogether, export will be there one way or the other. There are alternative ways available. They will be working. Apart from Romania, we also know what Poland is doing here. As compared to the situations at the beginning of the war, situation is saying that the situation is slowly improving. If there are no more questions, I would like to thank you, all the panelists, representatives of the UN Coordination Humanitarian Aid, Mr. Abreu, Victoria Mykhalchuk, Alyona Zubchenko, Brett Moore from the Agency of Refugees, and Varvara, Zhluktenko International Organization for Migration. Thank you.